want to welcome all of you who are here today. And I'll let you know that this will also be available should any of your friends or family have missed it. Get over here wherever I can forward to this slide. Hold on, everyone. I'm doing multiple little tricks here. I'm going to show you our logo, if I can do that. Oh, there it is. We have a Tucson Hard Science SF channel. And should you have missed it, or if you just want to teach it in a class, or you want someone else to have the ability to see this presentation, go to the YouTube science fiction channel that we have. And I do give the web address for that in every message that you get from our group. So go back and check your announcements. All right, so now I will stop my share. And this will allow Hua Li to open her share. And as she's opening it, I will say that she is the professor of Chinese literature and language, or just literature, at Montana State University, a very distinguished professor there who has so much knowledge in this area. And once again, we're thrilled to have you. So just carry on. If you need any help, just ask. I'll try to do tech.
Okay. Can you all see the screen now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So can I start? Hello?
I was muting myself. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Wow. Oh, all right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Gloria, for inviting me here and your generous introduction about myself. Today, my presentation will focus on two aspects. First, I'm going to give a brief introduction of the history of Chinese science fiction. Then I'm going to focus on contemporary Chinese science fiction. I'm going to examine the Chinese sci-fi scene, including major contemporary major writers and their works, publication venues, fandom, multimedia adaptations of prose sci-fi, and science fiction arts. So I'm going to start now. There have been four booms in the history of Chinese science fiction. Science fiction has never been a purely entertaining genre in China. From very beginning, Chinese science fiction has been an effective tool for Chinese intellectuals and writers to modernize China, to spread modern science and technology in the country and educate Chinese people. At the beginning of the 20th century, or even from the late 19th century, two important figures had played important roles in promoting the genre in China. One is Liang Qichao, another is Lu Xun. If you know something about Chinese history or maybe just modern history, probably you heard of those two people. Liang Qichao was a major player of the 100 Days Reform movement in 1899. He and his followers tried to reform Qing dynasty. However, the movement failed, only lasted 100 days. Then he escaped to Japan for refugee. Then in 1899, he called for fiction revolution. He envisioned that actually new fictional genres, such as especially those from the West, such as political fiction, science fiction, even detective fiction, would be instrumental in China to promote science and technology, to advocate democratic ideology, and to educate Chinese people to make them into modernized citizens. Another figure named Lu Xun. Lu Xun is the most famous, is a towering figure in modern Chinese literature. Lu Xun was the first writer to write fiction in vernacular Chinese language. So Lu Xun supported Liang Qichao's idea and also envisioned science fiction would be an effective instrument. both of them started to promote the genre through translation. For example, I show 3 book covers here. So Rouvin's 2 Years Vacation was translated by Liang Qichao into Chinese and published in 1920. Then Lu Xun translated and published Rouvin's another 2 novels in 1903, From the Earth to the Moon and A Journey to the Center of the Earth. Another frequently translated writer was H.G. Wells in the early 20th century, and also a Japanese sci-fi writer, not sure if you heard of him before, Shunro Oshikama. Actually, Shunro Oshikama was heavily influenced by Rouvin's. So he wrote the most famous fiction entitled Undersea Warship, which was translated into Chinese and published in 1913. So, in addition to the translation of a foreign, oh, by the way, one more thing. Actually, most of those fictions translated into Chinese was not from the original language, such as English or French. Instead, they were all translated from Japanese into Chinese. At the late 19th century, somehow Japan served as a filter, because a lot of Western books, not only literature books, but science books, were all translated into Japanese first. Then Chinese intellectuals, scholars live or study in Japan. Then they started to translate those books from Japanese into Chinese. Yeah, just that's one thing I want to mention here. In addition to translation, some early science fiction works were written, but at the very beginning, they were not called science fiction. Instead, they were called science fantasy. The first work was entitled Moon Colonization, which was written by Huangjiang Diaoso. This is the author's pen name. We still don't know the author's real name. The work was written in 1904, and meanwhile, it was serialized in the magazine Illustrated Fiction. However, the novel was not finished, an incomplete work, just all of a sudden stopped serialization and no explanation. Then in 1905, Xinyan wrote the fiction entitled New Tale of Mr. Braggadocio. It was a complete science fantasy work. It was a parody of a German work entitled The Surprising Adventures of Baron Munchausen. In addition to science fantasy, a lot of utopian fictions were also written. Sometimes this type of fiction was also called political fiction or ideal fiction or even reform fiction. I show some book covers here. For example, Future of New China, written by Liang Qichao, New Tale of a Dream of the Red Chamber, New Era, New China. Even from the titles of those fictions, we can see that those utopian fictions share a common theme, that is to envision a new, modernized, powerful, and democratic China in near future. In 1930s and 40s, some very good science fiction were written and published. 2 important writers, one is Lao She, another is Gu Junzheng. Actually, Lao She is not a science fiction writer per se. Instead, he's an acclaimed literary writer in China. But in 1933, he published a dystopian novel entitled Cat Country. The English translation is available a long time ago. The novel writes about some cat people living on Mars. Actually, the novel is a political and a social satire to reflect the social darkness, social illness, and chaos in the first 3 decades of the 20th century in China. Then another writer, Gu Junzheng, who in 1940, he published a collection of 3 of his sci-fi novellas entitled Under the North Pole, Dream of Peace, London Fog. After the publication of those 3 novellas, he also published another 2 entitled Sex Change and A Country Without Air. That's all his sci-fi works we have excavated so far. Maybe he wrote more, but we haven't found yet. Gu Jinzheng's writing was heavily influenced by British and American writers' works published in pulp magazines. And actually, some researchers in recent years found that I think 2 or 3 of his stories actually were rewritten of the American sci-fi stories in 1930s. There are some English scholarly monographs on early Chinese science fiction published in recent years. For example, one is 100 Days Literature, which focuses on utopian fiction at the end of Qing Dynasty, including the utopian fictions I showed earlier in the slides. Another is Nathaniel Isaktion's work, Celestial Empire, the Emergence of Chinese Science Fiction. He also examined the Chinese sci-fi from the late Qing Dynasty to early Republic era until 1920s. Last year, Jiang Jing published her book, Found in Translation, published by University of Columbia Press. Her book focused on how the foreign science fiction have influenced Chinese science fiction and the writers. Jiang Jing argued that actually Chinese science fiction has been a practice, has been a transnational, translingual, and transcultural practice. And I wrote a book review for her book and published in Science Fiction Studies February, I think February this year. Mao Zedong came to power and founded People's Republic of China in 1949. Then Chinese science fiction entered into an entirely different stage. And the function of Chinese sci-fi during the first 17 years from 1949 to 1965 was to popularize science and technology among young people, among juveniles. And also it was during this period of time that Chinese sci-fi was heavily influenced by the translations of Soviet sci-fi works and science essays. Here I just show a few books, Chinese versions of Russian or Soviet sci-fi books. Chinese science fiction during this period of time also responded to the central government's various policies. For example, in 1954, the central government, actually the Prime Minister Zhou Enlai raised the idea or the policy of realizing 4 modernizations, which are the modernizations of industry, agriculture, national defense, science and technology. And among the 4 modernizations, agricultural modernization was emphasized. Then in 1956, the rhetoric of marching towards science. Then Mao Zedong in 1957 praised the Chinese youth is the morning sun, and we should, or the party or the professors, teachers should help shape young people into communist new men. So Chinese science fiction responded to all those rhetorics and policies, and sci-fi was included in the category of children's literature. I show 2 posters here. One is marching towards science, another is learn from the Soviet and march towards the advanced science in the world. There are some good sci-fi works were written. Here, I just show few to reveal the variety of themes of Chinese sci-fi during this period of time. For example, in early 50s, dream travel in the solar system, space travel, adventure around the sun, published in early 50s. Then in early 60s, Dense Fog Over the Old Gorge, written by Tong En-zheng. This was a very good mature science fiction work. It's a combination of science fantasy, archaeology, history, and colonization. Another work, Adventure of Booker, written by Xiao Jianheng, published in 1962, was about organ transplant. Then in 1962, Liu Xingshi's novella Cloud from the North was published. This work is about weather manipulation. So artificial rainfall were created to benefit agricultural production. Chinese science fiction after 1965, Chinese science fiction writing and publication had suspended for 10 years from 1966 to 1976. This 10 years was known as a Cultural Revolution initiated by Mao Zedong. Mao died in 1976. Only after he died, Chinese science fiction became active again, revived again. Mao died in 1976, then Hua Guofeng became the president for 2 years. Then Deng Xiaoping, a very important political figure, came to power in 1978. So Deng Xiaoping gave a talk at the National Science Convention. He declared the government's policy change from class struggle to economic development. And also he declared that China was going to open to the West. He also emphasized that science and technology are advanced productive power. So his talk encouraged Chinese intellectuals and writers. So a lot of veteran writers returned to the field. I show the pictures of 4 writers here: Zheng Wenguang, Ye Yonglie, Tong En-zheng, Xiao Jianhou. All of them were active in 1950s and 60s. Now they returned to the field. A lot of the old works were reprinted, and also they started to write new science fiction. Meanwhile, a lot of new writers entered the field. A lot of science popularization magazines and sci-fi magazines were launched. For example, Wisdom Tree. This was a very short-lived magazine, only lasted several years, then closed down. But another one, Science, Literature, Art, is still active today. Actually, it has experienced 2 name changes. Now it's known Science Fiction World. Actually, Liu Cixin and a lot of other contemporary sci-fi writers all first published their works in Science Fiction World. Okay. And also fan clubs were established and fanzines were issued. The first Chinese fanzine entitled Nebula actually was published later in 1988. Okay. And also fans started to get together to meet writers, to exchange their collections of sci-fi works. This photo, actually the 4 people in this photo nowadays are all very, very famous in China, either became writers or researchers or editors. For example, the figure at the right of the photo named Yao Haijun, who is also the chief editor of the fanzine Nebula. So now he's the chief editor of Science Fiction World, the magazine in China. Also, a lot of sci-fi research organizations were founded. Sci-fi researchers and fans and readers also started to excavate old Chinese sci-fi works and started to compile history of Chinese science fiction. A lot of writers and also researchers started to write theoretical essays to explore the genre. For example, the most famous debate in the early 1980s about science fiction was that should science fiction be more closer to literature or should be more closer to science? And also canonization of Chinese sci-fi. A lot of publishers started to publish anthologies, collections of the works written by famous writers. Foreign translations of foreign science fiction continued. Not only the reprint of the old classic sci-fi works by Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, or some Russian Soviet sci-fi writers, but also a lot of contemporary Western writers' work were translated into Chinese, such as Arthur Clarke, Asimov, Ray Bradbury, those writers. And their works heavily influenced Chinese science fiction writers in the early 1980s. Universities started to offer courses on science fiction. The most, I think the first sci-fi class was offered by Shanghai Foreign Language University in 1980, if I remember correctly. And the first Chinese sci-fi award, Galaxy Sci-Fi Awards, began in 1986. Then in 1978, some sci-fi works became very, very popular, not only read by sci-fi fans, but just by general readers. I just show a few here. For example, Little Smart Travels to the Future. It was written for children, but a lot of adult readers read it as well. Flying Toward Sagittarius by Zheng Wenguang and Death Ray on Coral Island by Tong Zheng. A lot of sci-fi processes were adapted into movie, animation, radio drama, and a comic book. For example, here is a movie poster of Death Ray on Coral Island, adapted from Tong Zheng's sci-fi work. This score is a theme song of a sci-fi radio drama entitled Clone Green Horse. Actually, a lot of Chinese people at that time, first time heard about clone science or technology was from this radio drama. Here is an animation film entitled Ding Ding Fights the Monkey King. And here is a front cover of a comic book adapted from Ye Yonglie's story, Black Shadow in the Ghost Mountain. It was also in the 1980s. Some Chinese science fiction works were translated into English. For example, this book, Science Fiction from China, probably was the first collection in English to introduce Chinese sci-fi works. Another one, Tales from the Planet Earth. Maybe some audience heard of this book before, because this book was edited or created by Frederick Pohl and Elizabeth Ann Hall. They invited 13 writers from different countries in the world to write on a common theme. That is, some aliens come to Earth and occupy the bodies of Earthlings. Then some interesting things happened. 2 Chinese writers participated in this international project. That were Tong Zheng and Zheng Wenguang. Tong Zheng and Ye Yonglie. Yeah, Tong Zheng and Ye Yonglie. I read both the English and the Chinese versions of their stories. I found some differences quite interesting, reflect the ideological differences during that period of time between America and China. While things look very well in terms of development of Chinese science fiction, however, in 1983, from October 12th to November 17th, a political event happened. That is a campaign to eliminate spiritual pollution, and science fiction was labeled as a genre to spread bourgeois ideology. So the publishers and the magazines stopped publishing sci-fi works, and the writers stopped writing, and some writers even left the field forever, such as Ye Yonglie. Later, after 1983, he became a writer engaged in biological writing, or biographical writing of the politicians in China. Quite a different change for him. So even though this campaign only lasted 45 days, however, the influence is long-lasting, and the Chinese science fiction remained dormant for about 15 years until late 1990s, when Liu Cixin and his contemporary Wang Jinkang and Han Song started to write and publish in late 1990s. My book, Chinese Science Fiction During the Post-Culture War, published last year by University of Toronto Press. My book focuses entirely on the period from 1976 to 1983. So my argument is that Chinese science fiction during those 7 years was government-backed, but also blooming, containing, and boundary breaking. So when I say boundary breaking, I mean that because in 1950s to mid-1960s, sci-fi was in the category of children's literature. Writers were mainly writing for young audience. However, in the late 70s and early 80s, writers not only write for children, instead more targeting at adult readers. So they break the boundary of children's literature and also break the boundary of just popularizing science and technology. So they try to promote a genre as a, science fiction as a genre literature instead of children's literature. And also a lot of themes of the science fiction works actually resonated with the themes of the mainstream Chinese literature during this period of time, such as reflection on the Cultural Revolution, reflection on Mao Zedong's radical movement to fight against nature, and also root searching themes, means go back to the pre-modern Chinese tradition, so on and so forth. Okay, from late 1990s, Chinese science fiction entered into another new stage. Professor Mingwei Song from Wellesley College named Chinese science fiction from late 1990s to the first decade of the 21st century, the Chinese New Wave. He used a term, I discussed with him why he used the term New Wave. He argued that actually by using New Wave, he means to emphasize the writer's exploration or applications or utilizations of various new writing techniques and the critical thematic concerns. So three big, these are the photos of the so-called Chinese three bigs, Liu Cixin, Wang Jinkang, and Han Song. Audience probably know very well about Liu Cixin already, especially his three-body problem trilogy. Another writer, Wang Jinkang, his novella, The Reincarnated Gen, was translated into English and also included in this collection. This whole collection use a title of his novel, but this collection include a lot of other Chinese science fiction. If you're interested in Chinese sci-fi, maybe this is a good book to check out because it includes Chinese sci-fi from the early 20th century until the first decade of 21st century. A very complete collection will give you a relatively complete picture of how Chinese sci-fi look like. Han Song is a very famous sci-fi writer in China. However, his works are not as popular as Liu Cixin's and Wang Jinkang's. Probably, more accurately speaking, his work is not as easy to read as Liu Cixin's and Wang Jinkang's. And also his work was labeled as soft sci-fi instead of hard sci-fi. But the good thing is that his trilogy, Hospital Trilogy, will come out next year, translated by Professor Michael Berry from UCLA. Yeah. And I think he finished translation already. It will publish next year. So on internet, I found this book cover, probably just a promotional cover of his trilogy. If you're interested, you're welcome to check out next year. I'm very curious how Western readers would respond to his writing, very, very different from Liu Cixin's writing. Some other contemporary writers worth known, such as Stanley Qiufan Chen. His most famous work is Waste Tide, which is about e-waste recycling industry in China, how this industry affected environment and human beings in that area. Last year, Chen Qiufan published a collection of short stories co-authored with Dr. Kai-Fu Li, who is an AI expert. The collection is entitled AI 2041. This book I haven't read yet, but it was heavily promoted in the West, and Chen Qiufan gave a lot of talks on this book. You can just go to YouTube and find most recent ones. I think most recent one, the talk he gave was in this month. He was interviewed by a Chinese professor in Columbia University. Another famous writer, Hao Jingfang, a female writer, her novella Folding Beijing won Hugo Award a few years ago. And 2 years ago, her novel Vagabonds was translated and published in English. The rise of female Chinese sci-fi writers has been phenomenal in the last 2 decades. Just name a few here: Hao Jingfang, Xia Jia, Wang Kanyu, Qian Lifang, Tang Fei, and Zhao Haihong. Some of their works were translated into English already and included some collections. For example, those 2, Invisible Planets, Broken Stars, both of them have a lot of those female writers' works. Last year, another 2 English translations came out. One is Synopticon. This collection not only includes female writers, but also male writers' works. But the other one, The Way Spring Arrives, only include female Chinese writers' works. And earlier this year, China published another collection of female Chinese writers' works entitled She. I think published in February this year. I hope the English translation will be available soon. Western science fiction have been continued to be translated into Chinese and published in China. Last year, 2021 was a 100 years anniversary of the birth of a Polish writer, Stanislaw Lem. So 6 of his novels were translated and published into Chinese. So here are the covers of the 6 novels. I also give the English titles underneath. Meanwhile, those Western classics, such as Heinlein's Double Star, Foundation Trilogy, Lagoons, The Left Hand of Darkness, and The Neuromancer, and Rebreviaries as a class works will continue to be either retranslated or reprint into in Chinese versions. Another thing is that actually Chinese readers, especially sci-fi readers, are relatively young, so they have a very good education. they know English pretty well. So a lot of them just read original English sci-fi works. They don't have to wait until Chinese translations come out. So I have to say they keep up very well with contemporary American or British science fiction works. Publication venues. Sci-fi magazines and science popularization magazines and newspapers are still main publishing venues for writers. The most famous magazine is Science Fiction World, another is Science Fiction Cube. At the same time, publishers continue to publish collections, anthologies, and yearbooks of Chinese sci-fi. Sometimes mainstream literary magazines also have special issues on science fiction. Internet has always been an important site for writers to publish their works, especially for new writers or obscure writers. For example, the site I often visit is Starting Point Literary Net. This website actually have a ranking, always has rankings for example, best read work of the week, best read work of the month. So sci-fi writers, some young writers, they don't care if their works will be accepted or published by physical media, by magazines. Instead, they just write and post their works on the website. Actually, they have been paid not bad. Actually, I have to say they have been paid decently. Some of them, they quit their job just to focus entirely on writing. So the money paid by the website are enough to support their life. Fandom, right? So a lot of campus-based fan clubs have been established. A lot of regional and national sci-fi organizations were also established, such as Nutshell, 8 Light Minutes, Future Affairs Administrations. Those organizations were all started by sci-fi fans. Then later they expand their activities, such as science popularization, sci-fi promotion, publishing, organizing conference, and also they involved a lot of sci-fi award ceremonies. There are also some government-sponsored regional or national sci-fi writers association or science popularization organizations. Internet is also an important site for fans to get together to discuss sci-fi works, to share their thoughts. Fanzines from 1998 to 2021, a total of 106 fanzines were launched, but most of them just lasted a year or two or just a few months. But currently 11 fanzines are still active, such as Nebula Sci-Fi Review, Sci-Fi Weekly, and the Dust Cloud. Nebula Sci-Fi Review is a very good one. They publish a lot of book reviews for the most recent Chinese science fiction, sometimes also reviews about Western sci-fi works. There are two major sci-fi awards in China. One is Galaxy Awards, started in 1986. Another one is more recently started in 2010, named Xinyan Awards for Global Chinese Science Fiction. So Xinyan actually in English means nebula, but I guess they want to differentiate from the American Nebula Awards. So they keep the Chinese name Xinyan Awards. Yeah, there's a photo here. It's kind of blurry, but if you see the photo carefully, maybe you can recognize here is Liu Cixin. Liu Cixin is here, and Wang Jinkang is here. Then this is Professor Wu Yan, who is a very known scholar in Chinese science fiction in China. Sci-fi films, most famous one, The Wandering Earth, came out in 2019. It was also screened in America and other countries in the world. In the same year, some other sci-fi movies also came out. For example, Shanghai Fortress, Long Day's Journey into Night, Crazy Alien. Actually, since Liu Cixin three-body problem when Hugo Award, then money, capital, hard money started to enter into Chinese science fiction field. So a lot of people invested in sci-fi films. Last year, another sci-fi film came out, Journey to the West. I haven't seen it yet. It's a science fiction and also a comedy. The English title is a little bit misleading. It's different from the Chinese classic, the Monkey King one, Journey to the West. It's totally different. I don't understand why they translated the title, English title into this, because the Chinese title is very different. Sci-fi arts, I just show a few. So here, this sculpture, Alien Immigrant, another is oil painting, The Garden of Post-Eden. The creator of both works is a Chongqing-based artist named Fu Yuxiang. Those two works were collected by museums. I think one is by a museum in Sweden, yeah. Another was collected by a museum in Singapore, the oil painting, right? I think it's in a museum in Singapore. Sci-fi illustrations, I just show two works here by Chinese artist Zhao Enzhe, who is also a computer game designer, an illustrator too. In China, every year now, there are some sci-fi arts exhibitions. I just give one example here. This took place in 2021, Science Fantasy Era Techno-Scientific Concept Exhibition. Look at the photo here, especially I want you to pay attention to the set, Shougang Park. Actually, this location, this place used to be a steel factory in Beijing, but later the factory closed down and they turned the whole factory into the kind of art scenes. A lot of artistic or art studios rent their offices or gallery here in this factory. Very, well, kind of industrial punk flavor. I haven't been there yet due to the pandemic, but I will next time when I go to Beijing. Comic books. So here I just show a few pages from the comic books adapted from Liu Cixin's works, such as Village Teacher, Wandering Earth, Sea of Dream, The Round Soap Bubbles. A lot of fans actually, especially young people, they don't read books. Instead, I mean, they don't read science fiction books. Instead, they read comic books directly. Okay, the last, not the least, the 81st World Science Fiction Convention will be held on August 23rd to 29th, 2023 in Chengdu, China. So if you go there, very likely you're going to see all those Chinese sci-fi writers such as Liu Cixin, Han Song, Wang Jinkang, Chen Qiufan, and a lot of Western writers as well. I know that they're all coming. So I'm going to end my presentation by showing you a promotional video of the Chengdu WorldCon 2023, just to show you what Chengdu looks like. Okay, let me see.
春作。
Okay, let me. Okay, that's all my presentation.
Well, shall we give a round of applause for this? I don't think we've ever had such a presentation. On you to do your applause. Yay.
Thank you.
That was great. And this, of course, will be replayed on our YouTube channel, which you can see the address. Everyone, if you don't have the address of the YouTube channel, here it is in chat. If you look at your chat, it's right there. And I should have this whole thing wrapped up in the can, as they say in Hollywood, and out there by tomorrow, I hope. So at this point, perhaps we should open to some people. Well, my husband put one question in the chat, so maybe you could answer his first, and then it's open to anyone else that has questions.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Bob. This is a very good question. I didn't have time to elaborate on that. Actually, the Chinese translation have been very, very different from the original work. For example, the translation of Rouvin's 2 years vacation, even from the title is so different. When I read the Chinese title, I didn't recognize that is a 2 years vacation, because the literal translation of Chinese title is 15 little or 15 young heroes. So actually, also those early translators such as Liang Qichao and Lu Xun, they took the liberty to add things they want to add, because they saw science fiction instrumental to spread modern ideas, modern science and technology. So they add things that they think will be beneficial to Chinese people. So they really took a lot of liberty. I guess Japanese translators probably did the same thing. So that's why when you really compare, you will see, oh my God, it's so different. Sometimes they don't know the Japanese very well, and they have a Japanese translator to translate from Japanese to Chinese orally for them. Then they just wrote down, rewrite everything. So you can see the difference. Yeah, not very reliable. I hope I answer your question. Yeah, but it's just a early 20th century situation. But now I have to say, when the works contemporary, yeah, even from 1950s, the translations are more close to the original work because they were translated directly from whatever language was into Chinese. So it is more, they are more accurate, more close to the original works.
style would become rather flat.
We're not hearing this.
Microphone's not working.
So come over and use mine. Bob is talking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's trying, and I just went in the other room to tell him.
Okay,
we
can you
couldn't
hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
now we can hear you.
Yeah, I was just saying that even Jules Verne being translated from French into English
Mhm.
would degrade the story tremendously. The style became very flat.
Mm.
They would leave out a lot of the fascinating technical discussions about submarines and so on.
Mm.
So this is not a problem unique to Asian translations.
No.
Do we have anyone else with a question?
Yes, perhaps I've got a question here, if you don't mind. Thank you for a lovely presentation. Certainly, I found it very interesting. I've been involved in translating Polish writers' English into proper English in order to create short stories. And one of the problems I've come across is to what extent should the translator get involved in relocating the places, say from Poland back to the United States or from Slovenia back to the United States? And in what respect should one start addressing the new audience that the translated text will have? For example, if I'm translating from, and my co-author is translating from Polish into English, should we take into account more the audience is going to be American and start putting things in like it was the Americans who first put a man on Mars? Or should we stick with the original and have the Polish guy have the success?
Wow, this is an interesting question. I think it depends on the individual translators themselves to make the decision. I haven't translated any sci-fi works yet, but through my talk, I know some translators who translated English sci-fi works into Chinese, or Kan Liu, who translated Liu Cixin's works from Chinese into English. From their translate, because I read both, right? I read both English and Chinese originals. When I compare the translation with the original, I feel they're more loyal to the original. They don't really take liberty to try to please the target audience, either in China or in States. They are more loyal to the original. Yeah, my understanding. Yeah.
Thank you for your
But
answer.
sometimes they cut. They left something out. They left something out there when they think, oh, they believe not significant to American readers or to Chinese literatures. I think it's very common in the translation field, because I'm in Chinese literature field. I saw a lot of English translations. Even translators just told me directly, oh, I don't think this part is important. I just leave it out there.
Sadly, that is one of the few options that the translator's got. He can't add brand new material and add extra chapters in just because he feels they should be there. Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Any others? I know one of our members is trying to join from Zambia, and he may have
Zambia.
Zambia in Africa. And he joins multiple times sometimes, and it's the connections are very hard, and I hope he can make it in. Maybe he'll be able to ask something just from what he knows. His name is Pastor Malaya, and he's trying to join, right? He may have gotten the time a bit off. I'm telling him in back channel email that I'm giving him the link to the video that we're going to have of this. So Anyway, others who are still here, I had a question. Well, I'll get back to me later. I had a question now with so many, I'm multitasking too much. I can't remember what my question was.
I'll ask a question.
Sure. Okay.
So we hear a lot about internet being censored in China, and I wondered if that applies to any of the science fiction written, or if you know about anything that's not allowed to be published.
Oh, yes, yes. Censorship is always there. Writers do self-censor. Yeah, they have a good sense what will not be able to publish, what will be published. Even Liu Cixin, such a famous writer, he still have one or two works which has never been published in physical form, in book print. For example, his novel 2085. He wrote that is a dystopian story about the revival of Mao Zedong on internet. So definitely it will not be able to publish, but it has been widely circulated on internet. Yeah, I read it. I even wrote an article on this novel and published in Science Fiction Studies a few years ago. Han Song, another famous writer, also he has some works which cannot pass the censorship by publishers or magazines. They know it, then they just post it on internet. Readers read it. Yeah, because the propaganda bureau won't have enough time to examine every single work published on internet, right? And also those works were published earlier. At that time, they were not famous. So they will not, pay close attention by the authorities. Yeah, definitely censorship is still there. Yeah, for example, in 1950s, Chinese science fiction, no writers wrote anything about aliens. Why? Because Marxism doesn't believe there's aliens there, right? Everything, materialism, right? Yeah, so authors know that, oh, I'm not going to write it. No such thing. I mean, they know, but they know whatever they wrote won't be published. Yeah, censorship is there, always.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I keep hitting the wrong button here. My chat is going all over my screen. It's very strange with all these little windows. So is there anyone else? You can type your questions in chat, and if Coster is actually with us, he may have a question. I'm checking participants again to see if he's in. I don't know if he's in, but I gave him the email address of, I'm trying not to hit the wrong button and knock us all off. I gave him the email address of where this will come online, and you can all see that on our chat here. If you go down to the last item in chat, you can select all, and then it should, if you hit the right mouse click, you can copy it to your, wherever you want to copy it, and that will get you right to our channel in YouTube, so that this will become available tomorrow as a video for as many millions of friends as we have online, and you'll have a huge audience, hopefully. I'll be publishing it. You can publish this address on your web page, on your Facebook pages, any of you, to get more audience for our group. We would appreciate that. So I don't want to tax our speakers' time. If no one else has another question, we will just thank her again for a fantastic presentation. And I want to say next time, just before we leave, I should mention next time we're having Paul McComb, who teaches at the State College of West Virginia, and he's going to be talking about Haiti. He's a native of Haiti. Haiti between two worlds, the traditional and the technological. He does Afro-pessimism, Afro-futurism type science fiction, also he's studying the consciousness of different cultural groups, that they aren't all overlapping and totally interchangeable, as you just got through the translation problems, that each one is a mental universe, and Haiti has one mental universe that he will tell us about. So once again, am I saying your name right? I embarrassed myself. Hua Li. Is that
Yes,
close?
yeah.
Okay. Once again, Professor Hua Li, we want to thank you again, and hope to see you again at one of our meetings, or maybe have you come back again. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you too. Thank you, the audience, for wonderful
That was great.
questions and for listening to my presentation.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Um,
Bye.